Hello, everyone. Welcome. And for those of us streaming with us tonight, I appreciate everybody's patience as we got us getting going on Facebook Live. My name is Rebecca Dirks Garcia. I am an administrator for CCSD Parents. And we are having a conversation tonight about the portrait of a Nevada learner. And I am just going to confirm that we are all streaming good so that people can see us. And it looks like we are good. So welcome. So let me introduce who's with me tonight. So I have with us Alberto Quintero, who is the education programs professional at the longest department name at the Nevada Department of Education, the Office of Parental Involvement and Family Engagement. So thank you, Alberto, for joining us. I'm Janine Collins, who's the Chief Innovation Officer with Ed Extraordinary, and is one of the main players helping facilitate the work behind the Portrait of a Nevada Learner. And then also an educator, Sara Ross, who is the middle years program coordinator for the International Baccalaureate program at Valley High School and an educator in social studies. So excited to have everybody with us tonight, and we're gonna hopefully just have a conversation that helps families better understand what's happening at the state level about this Portrait of a Nevada Learner, starting with what even does that mean? I know as a mom myself of three kids still in school in the Clark County School District, sometimes trying to figure out all the different things in education and all the different terms and policies and programs can kind of seem like it's hard to keep track of everything. And especially in the last several years, things have been moving very quickly and changing a lot. And so hopefully this conversation will help folks get better acquainted about the work that's happening and help families understand the role that we have in providing input and helping shape the conversation about what we want this to be for our state and for our kids and what we want education to be for them. So with that, Janine, let's start with that foundation. Can you share a little bit more about how Nevada decided to develop a learner portrait and what that is?
Absolutely. Thanks, Rebecca, for having me here tonight to share this information with families. So the portrait really comes out of the Nevada Department of Education's desire to answer the call that they heard in the pandemic around the need to develop a more responsive, agile experience for Nevada learners. And systems, whether they're a school or a district or a state, create a portrait, or what sometimes is called a profile of a learner, to really develop a shared understanding around who we want young people to be as a result of moving through their education experience. And the process and the conversations and the act of putting that profile or that portrait together is really foundational to any kinds of big transformational shifts that can eventually happen. And what's exciting and also interesting about the process is that it's not a straight line. And so we're at the phase by building a portrait or profile, and the department has decided on the term portrait of a learner because they wanted to create a shared vision around how we see ourselves and how we understand ourselves through our learning journeys in relationship to the community. And the idea of a portrait of a learner is that we are all learners, not just in our K-12 experience, but through the course of our lives. And the hope and the idea of the time that we spend in school is that we can be prepared to meet the evolving challenges that our future is presenting us right now and will continue to present us. So the kinds of things that appear on a portrait or a profile are usually mindsets and skills that are really necessary to make sure that learners can apply the knowledge that they're learning. And it's about helping them do something and become someone. So we have standards, we have knowledge that we engage with. The portrait helps us look at who we want young people to be because they're engaging with that knowledge. And that guides all kinds of decisions that we make about learning and teaching and who we partner with and how we support educators and how we design experiences and budgets. It can really affect so many things. And you'll hear more about that, I think, from a working educator's perspective too. But that really is the point, is to build that shared vision and to have that common understanding, and to be able to create that big picture clarity around the why of what we're learning.
I really appreciate that. And you will hear me probably stumble between portrait and profile. Sara, as an IB educator, International Baccalaureate, which CCSD, the Clark County School District, has some amazing IB programs. My own kids have gotten to participate in those. And that's where I really learned about this concept of a learner profile, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So I always want to default to that versus portrait. But I also think it's important to kind of connect this back, like you said, Janine, to where we were really in the pandemic. And so many of us said, when we go back, we want education to look different. Speaking for myself as a parent, I'm not sure we feel like that really happened. But I think this is an opportunity to see maybe some work that's happening behind the scenes that parents and even educators may not see what's happening fully, about opportunities to move that conversation forward about what we want for kids. Because I know too, you think about it, I don't think I'm that old, but I won't say, how many years ago I graduated high school, and education looks different, right? From when I was in school, when we were in school, versus what our kids are. And even the job market looks so much different, and how they're going to live their lives when they graduate in 3 years, 10 years from now. So Alberto, in your role with the Nevada Department of Education, you are really focused on parental involvement and family engagement. What opportunities do you see for families to learn about and engage in this process overall?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Rebecca, for the question. So one thing I really want to zone in on, in terms of something that Janine had brought up, was this idea of a shared vision, right, of what that journey looks like. And it's really difficult, and honestly, it's critical that we make sure that family voice is elevated within that conversation, right? And also takes a piece, right? Because if this is a shared vision for what our child's journey is and achieving that North Star, what does that look like? Those qualities of what makes up that journey can exist without collaborating with families, right? I always want to point out two standards within the Family School Partnership Standards by the National PTA, right? And one of those standards is speaking up for every child. And the next one is shared decision-making, right? Where family voice is crucial to the educational experience, structure, and system that a child goes through. And that also, in order to have a true collaborative conversation, we have to invite and engage families, and all families from all walks of life, in that conversation, right? And take their into account, right? Where we hear their voice and we implement it on how we're moving forward as a community, as a group, and as an education system. And so I know with this current initiative of the profile of a learner, there are various entry points in terms of how families can engage in the conversation, right? Whether they be in-person functions, whether they be work groups, whether they be surveys, to be adaptable to how we know and understand, and all families have the time and space to attend some of these events to provide that feedback. But what's most important is not who is necessarily showing up in those in-person events, is are we capturing the feedback and the input of all families who are involved within this process. And so that's why there's an existence of surveys. And just because this work has started doesn't mean that families can't enter the conversation and their feedback won't be valued. And so I know we have a list of various events in various ways on how families can still provide feedback, and it's not too late. And I know those are resources we're going to share in the links once this is posted, and then also specific dates of when families can attend or take those surveys.
Yeah, I always think sometimes we forget families were reacting to what happens in the system after it's happened. rather than knowing about things when they're being created. At least as a parent, that's how it's felt a lot of times in my journey as a parent. And that was one of the reasons, as I've known about this going on at the state level, I reached out, and Janine and you've reached out to me to include me in some of the conversations, and why I wanted to share this with families, because I mean, you think about it, we're the ones who, at the end of the day, your kid comes home and tells you what they like about school and what they don't like about school. they tell you, or once I've already had one graduate and they've told me what they liked about their educational, experience and what they didn't like about it. And so there's some really honest feedback that I think that families have about the process and how they feel like their kids have been prepared, whether it's older kids who are already out of the system, but you still have younger kids at home, that if we don't share it, it may not be captured by somebody else who is part of the education system and doesn't view things in the same way. So I appreciate Alberto. And of course, I love that you use the PTA standards, because I think they are just such good information to come back to, where it is making sure that every child's voice and every family gets the opportunity to contribute. And then also that there is that shared decision-making in the process for things. So Sara, I've heard a lot of feedback from families since we announced this conversation that they're just like, what is this? How does it impact my kid? Because it sounds great to have this concept of what we want kids, the North Star, or what should be true, or what we want for them. But at the end of the day, what does it actually mean for my kid in the classroom, in their education? And as an international baccalaureate teacher that uses a concept very similar, can you share more about your experience with that IB learner profile and how it impacts kids in classrooms right now? And IB obviously also has been a gold standard in education for 50 plus years. So it's not a new concept across the globe in that regard.
Yes, gladly, Rebecca. Thank you so much for inviting me in. And I will share at my first International Baccalaureate, or IB teacher training, the very first component that they rolled out to us as new IB teachers was the learner profile. And I too was kind of like, okay, this is nice. But I really, now that I live and breathe IB, and I have for the past 4 years, and I work with facilitating new teachers with IB and continuing our program, I really, really see all of the great that the learner profile does. So I'm probably going to default to the word profile because that's just part of my vernacular. So the learner profile really is, it's the philosophy that drives all of our content and or the way we deliver content and skills, as well as the sense of community that we aim to develop. So for example, our learner profile includes skills such as being a communicator, a thinker, an inquirer, being my favorite ones.
A risk taker. Sorry,
a risk taker. Yeah, no, I know everyone has their favorites. So for me, I really love balanced, open-minded, caring, reflective, because these are, as all three of us have alluded to, they're what, or all four of us, all three of you have alluded to, it's what we want all learners, all humans in Nevada and in the world broadly to carry forth. And so it guides all of our decision-making with outside of school programming, with our college week, with our retreats, with all of the wraparound services, the mental health support we offer. It all ties back to the fact that we want balanced, caring, open-minded, risk-taking, knowledgeable, communicating students and learners. And to give an example of how this shows up, and to really highlight the point that in this case, with a learner profile, life skills are driving content, not the other way around. I'll give an example from before I became an IB teacher versus after, and now that I'm kind of, as I said, I live and breathe that all day. So in my US history class, in my first year of teaching, we, finished this project, and I asked students to give an elevator pitch about the research that they had done, thinking like, oh, that's a great interview, life skill, networking. Awesome. And I was really darn proud of the fact that the students stepped up to the plate and did that. And, I got into teaching because I knew that I wanted to help students develop life skills, but it's still, looking back, it felt very accidental. Like, we knew we wanted them to communicate, and sure, we found an opportunity for them to do that. And yes, they are the better off for that. And so it is wonderful that we have teachers in CCSD who are already making that part of their classrooms. However, when we start with a learner profile, it really becomes part of the guiding decisions with all of the learning experiences we curate. And in an IB program, it's not just one teacher, but it's an entire student's day. And so if we think about students across Nevada, across kindergarten to 12 and beyond, working with that, it's really transformational. And so to give an alternate example from the accidental, we'll have students talk about their projects. What we do now as a final in my IB humanities class is I really look at what learner profile traits do I want to be able to see their huge growth in that we've worked on. So I'm like, I know as a social studies teacher, I want them to be open-minded and knowledgeable. I want them to be able to communicate and show that off, show how they can solve problems. And so instead of taking a pen and paper test or even just writing an essay about some content, showing content standards and content skills or disciplinary skills, instead what they're doing is they're working together to try to create a shared platform of Indigenous peoples who are affected by climate change. And so they're using the skills of reading, of discussing, of writing, of reflecting as well. We see a lot of self-awareness develop with our students. So as teachers, we are creating learning experiences that I think really translate more to the quote unquote real world, as well as we're able to just elevate everyday learning experiences. Following, we start classes with warm-ups or questions to activate students' knowledge. And after a warm-up, instead of me just saying, okay, right, what does equality mean for you? Instead, after we pause and we say, which learner profile traits did we use most in that? And so I think it gives students a real sense of self-efficacy when they realize that they weren't just, doing some writing for their teacher. Instead, they realized like, oh, wow, I was open-minded because I listened to my classmates' definitions. I was caring, I was knowledgeable, I communicated. And that really just elevates that immensely. So I hope some of those examples can be helpful.
Those are really helpful. What does self-efficacy mean? That's not a word a lot of us use in a regular day.
Yes, you're right.
The word that I had to develop in education world, because educator world loves it.
Yes. So I'm sorry.
And it's become actually a really, once I've learned it as a parent, I am totally on board with the concept behind it, but it's not a term we use a lot.
That is, and I promised, I was like, I'll catch myself. It'll be fine. So
we talked about jargon because it's one of my things.
So the way I see self-efficacy is students believing in their abilities to carry out a task effectively, and not just a task given by teachers, but tasks and goals that they themselves set. So they are owning the fact that they're not just going through their day doing math problems and writing and reading, but they have a greater sense of purpose and the skills and confidence to back that up.
Yeah. And it's really how they think about themselves, right? Like that they have the ability to do things. And I think not all kids are at that point, but when you put some of the ownership on them, there can be a different thing. I also like that you point out that there are a lot of great teachers already bringing these concepts into their classrooms without necessarily having a profile or a portrait attached to it. A lot of it is what really great teachers just do naturally. I find a lot of times policy and education is just trying to share that information out of what great teachers seem to just get and see and figure out. But also a lot of those soft skills, I work in workforce development in my day job. And it's interesting how often, I haven't had to show anybody what grade I got on a math quiz or even tell anybody what was the last math class I took for decades. But every day at work, communication, how I interact with other people, my interpersonal skills, all those soft skills, even risk-taking, the things that you don't want to do that you have to do on the job to get a promotion, negotiate a deal, different things like that are part of those soft skills that employers are always saying, those are often harder to train, but what really make an excellent employee. But at the same time, people go, okay, we're talking about all these things and we're sitting here and all of us happen to be in Las Vegas right now. And the Clark County School District has some real struggles with just covering the basics of reading and math and making sure kids know those solid foundation academic skills. So this isn't necessarily to any one person. Whoever wants to jump in on this question, do. What do you say to the people who are like, we just need to focus on making sure kids can read and do math and that they graduate proficient, which, by the way, I hope we can all be in agreement that we want to see all kids be proficient and prepared and educated. So from the foundation that we absolutely all agree that our education systems need to make sure kids have the academic skills they need to succeed in life. I hope we can all just say, yes, we all agree to that. But why does this also matter? And are they in conflict? Or is there a way to make it both work?
I'll jump in, and very, very interested to hear what my friends and colleagues would say about this too. But, it occurs to me that, we know so much more about how learners learn than we did all the many years ago that we first kind of designed the system that we're working in right now. And we know that through learning science, through what we know about the brain, we know that addressing the application of engagement is critical. Engagement is critical. And what engages people.
If kids aren't engaged in showing up, they're not learning anything.
No. And so when you are engaging and you're doing the things that Sara said, you're having experiences that are significant. You are having to present your work publicly. You have to form a real perspective and connect your sense of identity to what you're doing. And then you have to produce work that is of consequence and related to that can show that you're those things that you just described, Rebecca, like we have to do when we go to work. Those kinds of things help us learn the skills that we want and the knowledge that we want learners to possess. And so I don't think at all it's an either or. I think it's an incredible both and, that these durable skills, these soft skills, these power skills that we need to have to navigate the world that we're in are the kinds of things that bring us purpose and connection and allow us to understand who we are and do something with the knowledge that we're getting. And so I think thinking about what Sara said, learning in that context is really exciting. And then just the idea that those wonderful experiences aren't by accident, but they're by design is really powerful, because then we're making sure that all learners are really getting access to think about their knowledge in those ways and to apply them. And to me, I come to this work as I'm a parent. I'm also was an educator for many years.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to all of you, everybody on the panel
totally
but me
fine.
are actually educators. Yeah. I introduced by all the other titles. Alberto was a classroom teacher not far down the street from me in East Las Vegas too. So everybody on the panel are educators, not me.
No, and I had a similar experience to Sara, because I taught with a profile after many years of not teaching with one. And it was the synthesis of all the great things and then making it really intentional from the start. And so I think what I would just say is that anecdotally, I always noticed that if the framing and the design was in helping them see those things about themselves, the content, the learning and the learning was much stronger and the outcomes were much better. So to me, it just would be a real, if we focus on that, it's a way to really make sure that those skills are being strengthened.
And that was beautifully said, Janine. And what I would echo as well is, as a teacher coming back from the year of distance learning and the upheaval of the pandemic, I really credit a lot of the joy that I found in teaching and found in being in a physical classroom again came through working with that learner profile and curating learning experiences for students with that learner profile. And I think that's what they missed too about distance learning, is it was a lot more challenging to facilitate that. And I will say, as a teacher, when we talk about schools needing to be able to, again, our shared agreement that yes, students need to be not proficient and highly proficient in those skills, I would say when it comes to retaining quality teachers, I'm not going anywhere because I love my IB learner profile. And so I think there are a lot of other teachers that if they felt grounded in something like this, whether it's formal or a set, a profile they've kind of happened upon themselves. I think that's what keeps a lot of teachers in the classroom. And when we have, consistent, effective, and highly effective teachers, that's also going to lead to stronger outcomes for students.
And I'm just going to join on like the ditto and the echo train that Janine and Sarah had in terms of what they shared. And just jumping back to, when I used to teach, so I taught 7th grade ELA. It was always right. The focus and the importance of the core academic content is, we all agree that that's something that remains an important and critical piece. Just looking back at my students, I wish that I did have a profile of the learner in order to make sure that they connect what they've learned and what they know, and know how to engage with the world outside after the educational experience to show that. I think more so than now, students are wanting to know how to navigate, right, everything that's happened recently, and with the pandemic and all of, unfortunately, all of the negative side effects that it's brought to our students. And are they prepared enough to enter a world, to navigate a world, in addition to having that core academic content? And so, when I used to teach, I wish that I was able to instill that more with my students, right? Because oftentimes we see it all the time. If someone has that knowledge, that core content knowledge, but they aren't able to apply it or to engage people, to display that this is what I know, but then also being confident in how they identify and who they are, right? Those are big milestone steps that we don't want students to be left to do alone, right? That's something that we help build them up towards that. And in the little bit of family feedback that we've gotten, right, we're starting to see that, right, from families saying, yes, absolutely, the core contents are important, but I also wish my child was better prepared on a whole, more so with specific sets of knowledge and skills, right? And I think as we move throughout this process, we're going to zone in and narrow in on what those skills and knowledge pieces are specifically. And so that's why it's so important that we make sure we engage the community and we engage families in informing that.
I really appreciate that, Alberto, and all of your comments. I think one of the things that came to mind as all of you are talking to is it gives the opportunity to see a child as a complete perspective, potentially, if used well. Because I do want to caveat, everything comes down to how it gets implemented in the end. I know we're a little ways from that, but there's one of the frustrations we hear all the time from parents in this group is, my kid doesn't get judged by a standardized test, or my kid, has test anxiety, or this challenge that impedes them displaying who the parent really knows their kid is in an educational setting. And it feels like there's that disconnect. In theory, this can open up opportunities to help kids be more authentic in bringing everything and being recognized for all the skills that they have, not just did they fill out the checkbox in the right way on this activity.
And if
in a different way.
I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead, Sarah.
I find myself using this positive language in recognizing students. Like, that was so caring of you. Way to be open-minded, how reflective and self-aware. It really allows educators to recognize students positively for all of the wonderfulness and uniqueness that they bring to the table.
Yeah, because kids are all different. Even your own kids. Only they were all the same, it might make parenting easier, but I digress. So I think we've covered some of those. So Janine, let's go back to some of the timeline. So right now we're talking about this big concept that can shape all of these things, but what does it really look like from a timeline logistics perspective here in Nevada right now? And don't forget, what specific opportunities are there for families to engage? I want to make sure we get that out there.
Sure. Well, I want to respond by framing this up, because I think that it's there are definite benchmarks and timelines that I'm going to share with you in just a moment. But I want to invite everybody to assume a more infinite mindset when thinking about this work, because truly building a shared understanding about success, and then building on that to get even more clear on what that means and how that can actionably translate into classrooms. And then refining that and going through this sort of process of, well, what are we looking for and what is actually happening? And then to your point, how are young people showing evidence that in fact they're a critical thinker or a communicator? Like, these are not things that you snap your finger on at a state level and they just happen overnight. And so I guess what I want to say is, while we truly are in the very, very, very beginning stages of the portrait work. And so part of it's ongoing and it's iterative, meaning that just keep working on it and refining it as we go. The portrait at the state level is a new concept, but there are several districts in our state that have state profiles or portraits. They use both terms. And there are schools in Clark County and across, not just IB schools, but project-based learning schools that have profiles or portraits. And so that work is happening in our state. The idea is, how do we systematize it at a state level? And so that process really started towards the end of October, convening. We had about 200 folks from across Nevada come together to initiate this conversation and the idea that we were going to start this building process. And we had so many different people, young people, some family representation, a lot of educators, a lot of state agency folks coming together to really say, who do we want young people to be? And from there, we had a couple of virtual conversations. They're all cataloged on our website at portrait.nvfutureoflearning.org. We'll put it in the chat. And from there, we engaged people in an initial survey to build a draft. And that draft is now on the website. That draft is emblematic of the different concepts that we've heard from the community. And it's organized in different thought bubbles around a learner. And then these key skills and concepts that are coming up, from communication and relationship building, to empathy, to critical thinking, to civic engagement, to empowerment and decision making. These are all key concepts that are on the draft portrait. What we're in the phase of right now, that's going to go through about April 15th, is we're doing listening circles, virtual listening circles. We're showing up where, as we've been extending this invitation to the community, where we're invited to host in-person conversations. And we have about 40 plus right now growing list of portrait partners that includes schools and businesses and community organizations that are coming together to invite their communities to fill out the survey, to have a conversation about these skills. And during this phase, we're getting feedback on the draft portrait. And that will go through about April 15th. And then from about mid-April to about the end of May, the department is convening a portrait perspectives panel that has a broad sense of representation from parents and parent groups, and young people will be on this this portrait perspectives panel, and our business community will have representation. So all of our different kind of sectors of our community will have some representation on this group panel to look at the data and to start to kind of help collapse and prioritize and make meaning. And these are what the concepts and skills are. When we look at portraits at a state level, they're a little different because they kind of need to be like an umbrella so that district work can sit underneath it and more contextual school work can sit underneath it. So all of that's kind of informing the process. And hopefully by June, we will have like the portrait. And from there, it's not done. So then we'll have these kind of key concepts. From there, the Department of Education is also partnering with a national organization called KnowledgeWorks that helps do work at this level, because it's new work, right, for states to engage in work like this, to help them develop what are called competencies. And the competencies become the sort of the things that help bring those ideas to life. So a teacher would look at competencies and say, oh, if it's communication, what does that really mean for a kindergartner or a middle schooler or a high schooler? And how are we thinking about that? And so that process is going to go through some community feedback too. So our hope is while we already have educators engaging and piloting and helping us understand the work, while we're going through community feedback, while we're going to distill it down and get this version of the portrait for June that we're going to share with our district superintendents across the state. From there, it goes back to this process of building those competencies so that we can start working with educators in the fall around opt-in educators, not everybody all at once, like groups that are going to opt into the support and process. How do we start doing that? And at the same time, sorry, this is a complicated answer because it's a big thing. We're also building a space that's fondly referred to as the network right now, where we can engage young people and families and educators and business and community leaders to be a part of this conversation, because education is so important to how we build a thriving community. And so there's lots of ways to do the work. The department is really focused on really co-creating with the community, which means we're just in this early stage of building the portrait, and we have this opportunity for feedback right now. And then there's going to be more and more opportunities to engage as we start to make meaning of that. And so I wanted to provide that context, because to really, there's a difference between making a really beautiful picture of what we think needs to happen and then making it real. And Sara described real things that happen when you start engaging with it. And to really make it real is going to take time, and is going to be a process, and it will constantly be inviting new people into the work, into the conversation, and at the table. What I can tell you is that we have, Rebecca, I'm so grateful you hosted this now. We have a family and community member listening circle scheduled for next Tuesday evening. That's also on our website. It's on our social media as well, NV Portrait, on Twitter, on Facebook, even on Instagram. So folks can register directly at that link, which has been updated. I know it was broken for a moment. They did update it. And you can also jump on our website and get involved there, which is also where the survey is. In both English and Spanish. And so we have networks of people putting it out. We have hopefully lots of families after tonight's conversation that will interact with it. And hopefully more in the coming weeks as we continue to have these conversations.
And that's what I'd really encourage families to do, is visit the website. We'll drop the links in. It was in the link for the event too, but we'll make sure that they're very apparent after this. And take the survey, look at the portrait, the draft portrait. I guess the one thing I do want you to cover, and I know we're running kind of short on time, but the portrait at this point it does feel kind of generic. Like when you go to the draft, I understand generic may not be the term that those who spent so many hours on it want to use, but as a parent, it kind of looks like, oh, what does this mean? So right now it's still very high level and doesn't have those kind of parts and pieces that make it come alive in the classroom necessarily yet under it, right? So it's really, what are those big goals, and then more details going to be put in underneath of it to support it as it rolls out over time, is basically what you just said, right?
Absolutely. Okay.
Yep. So, and you did say the 28th already. Wanted to make sure you got that. Alberto, do you want to add anything about how your recommendations or your input regarding how families can participate in this work?
Yeah, so there's a myriad of ways, and I know we'll provide those in the comments in terms of surveys, in-person events, virtual events, and so forth. I'm pretty confident to say that all four of us on this call and others who are working on this initiative as well really want to build a portrait of a Nevada learner that's reflective of family and community voice. And so we highly encourage families, whether it's just through a survey, whether it's in person, whether it's a virtual setting, to really share your voice and your input and your feedback in regards to this initiative, and feel confident that we genuinely really want community and family voice to be reflected in this piece. And whether you think that, you only have a small comment or small piece of feedback to give, like, that is super valuable and important. And it's something that we will take into account when it comes to the draft. Well, we're already at the draft, but into the fine tuning and even the additional pieces of what that may look like. And so those on this call, great. If you participate, awesome. And I really highly encourage that those who weren't a part of this event or are not aware that this process is going on, to share that information with them as well. And all four of us, I'm sure, are more than happy to be a point of contact for those who want to learn more information about future events that have yet to be planned, right? And I know there's a newsletter, right? There's an updates link that folks can sign up on the website to receive those updates consistently. And so, yep, I just really want to encourage folks to be a part of this conversation because this is the building of a child's educational experience, and that can't happen without community and family voice being a part of it.
Yeah, and I think I know sometimes as families we feel like we take surveys and nothing happens with them. I just heard that comment a few times over the years, over the last couple of weeks. And I think that there is a different interest level in hearing from people on this. And so even if you're like, I'm not sure what I can say, just click on the survey and see how you respond to it. Because there's, again, like people want change, but sometimes don't participate in the process to get us to the next stage. So this is an opportunity to do it. And hopefully people will take advantage of that.
And Rebecca, if you don't mind me adding on to that, this is a process where what ends up becoming our portrait of a learner, it's a way to hold everyone accountable in that conversation, right? And so for folks who feel, well, my voice wasn't heard or they didn't listen, like, this is a way to hold us as a system accountable and ensuring that that vision plays out how everyone involved envisioned it.
Yeah, that our kids are actually ready for life. Like, because I think, if they have a certificate, that's great. And everybody loves to celebrate graduation. But I always say, like, for me as a parent, success is that they're not living on my couch when they're 25 and that they're taking care of themselves. And that's what I want to see. And that they're productive in the community, right? And that they are taking care of themselves and they're contributing to the world around them. What that looks like is going to look a little different for each kid, but that's, I think, at the end of the day, what most families want. But right now, sometimes the pieces of the education system don't always translate into that for all kids. And that's where I think this can do. Any last words as an educator you want to share with us, Sara, as we wrap up? I want to let the classroom teacher have the last word on this, because at the end of the day, really, it's kids, it's families, and it's educators that are the day-to-day heart of education. Like, that's what makes systems. There's these systems we always talk about, but the day-to-day is educators and kids. So what would you share about this work?
Well, it's such a joy to just be in community this evening with, feeling really the power of those partnerships of educators, families, students. So I would say, as you so eloquently put it, Rebecca, it's an opportunity to really critically consider what are the aims of education. And then we get to be intentional in this case about making those the true driver of education in Nevada. And at this point, where so much in the world is changing and where we want to see positive change in education, it's an opportunity to reimagine how those competencies are going to show up in classrooms. And to Janine's point about making it real, if there's any policymakers on the call tonight or listening later, I will say that part of the success of IB with the learner profile is the amount of training we get, and that requires dollars. So I'm looking forward, when we get to the implementation stages, to hopefully lots of support to prepare teachers to implement this effectively for our kids. But at the end of the day, I know that all of us, educators, families, policymakers, and we have a shared vision of what we want students in our state and learners in our state to go on to do. We want a state and a world filled with curious, communicative, purposeful individuals. And this portrait is a really, really neat opportunity to develop that together. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I love that. And I, again, parent paid by nobody in the education system. So I can advocate right next to you about how we need to make sure there's the investment for our schools to be successful in any of the work that's being done. And we're actually, though, at a really opportune moment to do that with the discussions happening in Carson right now about putting significant investment into the education system that's been long overdue. So it can potentially be coming all at a great time, hopefully with those investments that we're going to see too, that will lower class size and provide better supports for our educators to be able to do the work that they need to do. So really grateful for everybody joining us. Thank you so much for you guys doing the work, for coming on to help parents better understand this process. As promised, we will make sure all the links are in the comments and the body so that people can join the conversation, the listening session on the 28th, next Tuesday if they want. And also, again, super low lift. Everybody can go take the survey, including your kids. Don't discount. Even young kids can have some really specific feedback on what they would like to see in education. And you know what they say, like sometimes the smartest people in the room are the kids, because we got a lot of smart kids in the world these days. So thank you so much. And we appreciate everybody joining us tonight. Have a good one.